Good evening and welcome to 5-County Transition Talks. This is led by the Greene County Community on Transition, inviting together the Greene County along with Grant, Iowa, Lafayette, and Rock County to talk about issues of transition that are important to our students and to our families. Tonight, we are going to be talking about disability law against the lifespan. And we have attorney Vicki Davis with us. She's dedicated her legal career to supporting individuals with disabilities and their families throughout the lifespan. Motivated to pursue her career path by her younger brother with special needs, she represents clients regarding guardianship and decision-making, special education law, estate planning, obtaining services for high needs children, civil rights, and juvenile law. In 2019, she formed Davis and Pledl with her mentor, attorney Rock Pledl, and I apologize for Rock if I just totally screwed up his name. Focusing on disability and civil rights, practicing throughout Wisconsin on state and federal issues. She's passionate about children's legal issues and helping individuals reach their full potential. She lives and practices law in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and is married to her law school sweetheart with 2 young daughters. And well, I just want to thank you for being here, Vicki. It's a pleasure to have you.
Happy to be here. All right, so today we are going to talk about what I think, as a person who practices disability law across the lifespan, what I think some of the key issues are at this critical transition stage. So I'm going to share my screen and get my PowerPoint up.
So as that's coming up, Vicki, do you want people, if they have questions throughout, to either unmute or put them in the chat box? What would you prefer? Or both?
They are either one, whatever they feel comfortable with. I know sometimes it's nice to just type it out, but
I hear ya.
But yeah, feel free to just unmute too if you have a question.
Thank you.
Okay, so Tim already told you about my my biography, but I will say my partner and I, I think both of us are really passionate about the transition age because it's so critical. We get a fair amount of special ed law cases at this time, and a call that we joke about getting is that it's like May 21st, which is coming up, and a parent calls and says, hey, they're trying to graduate my kid in a week or 2 weeks, and I don't want that to happen. And then it's, the big scramble. So, it's a really crucial time, and you're all making a good decision by being here. And I'm going to get going here. So what happens at 18? A lot of things. I just have a sampling here, but, deciding whether or not to continue in school, making your own decisions about your education, including your IEP or not, giving your own consent for your medical treatment, and access to medical records, access to any confidential records, contracts, licenses, loans, credit cards, the ability to apply for those things. I put marriage and family with a question mark. Not a lot of 18-year-olds get married right away, but they can. That's the point. They can make that decision. They can make choices about reproduction and their health related to that. Huge one is transitioning to adult services. Some young people are on the waiver, some are not, applying for family care, IRIS, things like that. And then post-secondary education for some, employment for some, what is life after high school going to look like? And in the absence of some decision-making, substitute decision maker, they're going to be making these decisions on their own, or at least, they ultimately communicating the decision on their own. So we're going to cover 8 different areas today, and since we don't have a lot of time, I'm just going to kind of touch on each of these bird's eye view issues. Education, employment, social services, managing finances, so options for doing that, social security, housing, healthcare, and making decisions. Before we get started, does anybody have any specific questions or areas that they wanted to see covered that aren't on my list? I'm seeing a head shaking out. Okay, just jump right in if you have questions. So I will start with education. And coming from the assumption here that we are dealing with children who do have an IEP versus 504 or nothing at all. So I think the first thing is the PTP, or the post-secondary transition plan. Number one, does your child have one? I hope they do. But you know, I think that's a question worth asking. So anytime age 14 or beyond, that should be part of the IEP. It should be part of the process. The child should be invited to participate in their own IEP meetings, and hopefully doing that to the maximum extent that they can. But sometimes, you know, a lot of times I'll see these goals in the PTP that are not connected at all to what the child is currently interested in, not matched with what their abilities are, at least at this time. Or if they are correct, you know, they're not taking classes related to their interest level. They're not hooked up with, you know, services outside of school that can help them reach those goals. So just looking at that whole picture, finding out, are we bringing in other services where we can, especially if the child is already 18. But even if they're not, is DVR involved? Have they been invited to meetings? Are they participating? And by DVR, I mean the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation was working on, you know, employability for your child. So taking a hard look at that document, making sure it accurately reflects your child, and then making sure that the pieces are in place to actually support those goals. And I'm going to expand on that a little bit, and when this is on my employment slide as well. But it's not just, okay, my child wants to work and they want to be you know, employed in a certain field. They're interested in music, they want to work at a music store. So they're taking music related classes and they've had some retail opportunities or whatever. Their academic goals are still important. Can they fill out a job application either on a computer or, and most of them are on a computer now, like, can they do that? Can they do an interview? What kind of soft skills are they working on in school? So I used employment as an example, but if your child's not independent in the home or in the community, or they would be able to do certain things after high school, but are lacking some skills, identify those issues and build that in. You know, we're going to help them learn how to access a ride service. We're going to help them learn how to make their own calls to call and make an appointment. All of these things that are gaps, and if you would consider it a gap for another senior in high school who's about to graduate before sending them off somewhere, consider it a gap for this child, and what can we do to close the gap. Another thing I wanted to talk about is the summary of performance. So this is a very important document that the school district creates as a child is graduating or aging out of special education. And it includes a functional summary of how they're doing, both academically and functionally. Has a summary of all the different supports that they've needed in order to be successful, gives recommendations for what they may need in the future, you know, after school. And this is, it's really important as you're trying to access the supports that your child needs outside of the school district setting. So DVR, for any type of post-secondary, dealing with the disability services staff at the college or university level, you know, to ask for those accommodations and the things that you need to have a track record that you needed it and were provided it in high school. Somebody who picks up the summary of performance should be able to read it and get an idea of your child's disability and what their disability related needs are, what it takes for them to sit down and get through a class, what it takes for them to get through an assignment, through a test. Somebody who's never met them should pick it up and read it and have an idea of what it would take to serve them properly. And if there's not enough detail in there for somebody to get that, then it needs to be beefed up. I just looked at one for a 20-year-old who had a highly specialized program, and it said that there was one sentence for everything, like accommodations and supports to be successful. Like, cool, what were they? Please tell me more. Take advantage of the 3-year reevaluation, or obviously you can ask for a special ed eval at any time, but you know, those 3-year ones roll around on a certain schedule, and as you're the closest one to either graduating or aging out or anything in between, take advantage of that to get updated information. A lot of times people waive the 3-year re-eval because people, not in a bad way or any malicious way, but just, yeah, we all agree that they still need special education, so why do the reevaluation? Well, at this point, at this, you know, critical point, it gives you updated information on all those things we just talked about in terms of the summary performance that you can then take with you for your adult services applications, Social Security, etc. And then self-advocacy is so crucial. And I think, you know, just put self-advocacy in every single one of my slides for the rest of the presentation. It's crucial. If a kiddo does not have a self-advocacy goal, but they're going to be going on to either work or really anything post-secondary where they're going to have to talk about their disability and ask for accommodations, they need a self-advocacy goal. Unless they can do that perfectly independently by themselves already, which good for them, because many people don't have self-advocacy skills. But make sure that's in there, and you know, not just a goal, but the support they need to achieve the goal. So in post-secondary, no more IEPs, no more 504 plan. 504 still applies, but it's not, you know, the plan isn't portable with the child. It's still there. Kids, you know, students still have the ability to ask for accommodations. So when you're in that process of choosing a college or university, make sure you meet with the disability services staff, you know, the coordinator or specialist or whatever their title is at that place, and, you know, get a feel for that person and, you know, what they routinely do. Not that you're limited to what they routinely do, but, you know, what do they have experience with? What are the procedures like? Is your child going to be able to, you know, mesh with this person? And, you know, do they think they're going to be able to be successful there as you're making those decisions? Any questions about education issues before we move on to the next topic? Oh, I see. Oh, that's you, Tim, putting stuff in the chat.
Yeah, just ignore all the links that I throw into the chat.
Okay.
I don't see any questions coming up at this point, but please, you know, again, we encourage people to go ahead and put those questions in there, and we'll let Vicki know that they're there.
Okay, perfect. All right, employment. So we've started talking about some of these things earlier. So DVR, are they connected with DVR? And a lot of times we hear, oh, it's not time yet, it's not time yet, and the time, doesn't come. Are they having, if they are enrolled and they have a counselor, are they working on employment experiences? Are they doing that through the school? Are they doing it with DVR or both? What kind of support is going to be necessary for them to obtain and maintain employment? Is it job coaching? Is it, just help asking for and creating the accommodations? Are they going to need someone to support them full time? What is it going to look like? Is it a modified schedule? There's so many different things. Or is it just more of a matter of finding something that works? Like, this is a job where you are not going to be interacting with the public or with peers or superiors very much. You come in, you check in, you do your job, you check out, and that works for you? Or is it that you need physical accommodations, so like a large print screen reader, technological things, a different chair, a standing desk, physical things that somebody can buy one time or, from time to time that can help you do the job the same as anybody else. But then, and this kind of goes back to the PTP as well. What about all the skills that you need to have in order to have a job that aren't necessarily, in the job description, like people skills, interpersonal skills? Has your child ever gone through a mock interview with somebody? Do they have a resume? These are all things that can be worked on at school, worked on in programs outside of school. And then we talked about self-advocacy and disclosure issues. So employers are not supposed to ask, hey, do you have a disability, or what's your deal, or what's going on with you? So, and what are the boundaries for the child in terms of sharing and oversharing, and what does somebody really need to know? What's my privacy? All that. And usually, not usually, in order to get an accommodation, you have to share like what the reason it is that you're requesting it and the basis you're requesting it. So how do you balance those things? When is it appropriate, and how do you do it? Balancing income with public benefits. So, and we'll talk a little bit more about finances later, but how much can you work and still maintain, Social Security is one, but maybe you can work enough where losing your Social Security that's okay, I'm working, but losing the long-term care, family care, IRS, or whatever benefits are usually, a lot of people cannot afford to do that. So how do I manage those two really, really important things? And we'll talk a little bit about some of the, financial management issues, but just talking to a disability benefits specialist and other folks that can help you make those important decisions. And then I just mentioned creative employment opportunities. We actually have a company out here called Creative Employment Opportunities that specialize in helping anybody find work. And there are people out there who have the philosophy that anybody can have a meaningful job. So maybe you haven't found it yet, but it's out there. Anybody who wants to work, you can find a way to make them do it, and just be creative. And if the people who you're talking to if you're hearing no, find new people, keep looking, because anybody who wants to can work. I also mentioned the Social Security Pass program. It's called the Plan to Achieve Self-Support, and it's a way that people who have a certain employment or goal, including self-employment, like running their own business, can have some flexibility with the really strict Social Security rules in order to save money or do what they need to do to make that employment goal a reality. And then I touched on this a little bit, but making sure you're not over assets. So usually you can only have $2,000 in the bank. So how do you balance that with, you're bringing a check home from your job? And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. All right, questions about employment before going on to the next? Tim is Johnny on the spot with these links, and I did not have them all in my resources, so thank you.
I figure between your resources and my resources, we'll have resources.
Yes. All right, social services. And there are many, many social services, but I'm really talking about long-term care. So at 17 and a half, that's the magic age for a lot of things here. You can consult with the Aging and Disability Resource Center about which programs are going to be best for your child. Disability benefit specialist is completely free and can consult with you and or your child on the options. So the big ones, there are many different programs, but the big two are Family Care and IRIS. IRIS is my least favorite acronym of all the different, but it's disability services acronyms, but it's Include, Respect, I Self-Direct. So self-directed supports. And the idea with this is you do a functional screen and they figure out what the person's needs are, and then you get a budget with which to manage your care needs. And oftentimes this includes paying the people who have been caring for this person as a child when they are now an adult to do all the crucial care tasks that you've been doing for free as a parent. It also can pay for things like access to the community, transportation, health-related things, supplies, things like that. Family care is also a long-term care program. Oftentimes, people enrolled in family care are not living in their own home or their family home. Sometimes they are, that's not a requirement, but this might be where somebody is looking at living in a group home, or they might be in their own apartment, but with support that comes in. There's all kinds of different options, but those are the two main programs, and your ADRC can help you look at any other programs. In order to be eligible for these as an adult, and I would say being eligible for the waiver is a good indicator that you're going to be eligible for these programs, but it's not automatic, or you don't just automatically hop from one to the other when you turn 18. And that's one of the really stressful things for families around this time, is all this stuff happens around the birthday. So the functional screen is an interview process. It takes a couple hours to go through. I'm going to say 1 to 2 hours. And they are assessing the person in all areas of life down to really specific questions. Can the person prepare their own food, and what does that mean? So if food magically appeared in front of them, could they cook it? Yes, but can they go to the grocery store or use an app to order groceries, obtain the food, get it ready, cook? Would making their own food mean only microwaving stuff or eating cereal every day forever? Getting really down into the nitty-gritty about what this person can do. Can you do laundry? Yes, I can probably operate a laundry machine. However, laundry machine is in the basement and I can't get down to the basement, so I've never actually done laundry. You know, really getting down into details like that. And not just about chores and self-care, but about behavior, about interaction with others, communication, I mean, every area of life. In general, you are answering these questions in terms of the worst day, because you want to make sure that your person has the support, all the support they're going to need in order to be able to be successful. Choosing managed care organizations, I'm actually not sure how many different choices you have out in your neck of the woods. It's regional, but there are multiple managed care organizations in the state. There are also different like IRIS consultant agencies. Getting whatever you need to compare and contrast and make those decisions. And then developing that plan, either again, family care or IRIS, and what is the person going to need to be successful, not just, you know, can we do that with family? Do we need to bring in people outside? What are they going to need to access the community? What are they going to need in order to have a happy and healthy life? And it's not just, you know, are your basic needs met? It's more than that. Are you able to keep going to the church that you like to go to? Are you able to keep horseback riding or swimming at the Y or whatever it is that's important to you? Making sure those things continue. And how do we make sure they continue if you are not there? You know, like, how can we have it so if mom's work hours change, this person can still access all those great things that I just talked about? Okay, so managing finances. So I have a couple low-tech things on here: dual signature checking account, joint checking account. You know, many kids turning 18 have that with their family just as a way to kind of keep tabs on things. Conservatorship is probably not going to be, you know, something for an 18-year-old that's necessary, but it's basically somebody has control over somebody else's money with court oversight, and they don't have to be found incompetent to do that. Probably not going to apply to your family, but it's there. Trusts. So transferring money from one person to another person to manage and protect and act loyally in the person's benefit. There are special needs trusts, which I have another slide for that can act as a way to protect money above and beyond that $2,000 limit. ABLE accounts. I think anybody who has a disability and is going to work should have an ABLE account. I'll talk a little bit more about that, but that is a way to save money, again, above and beyond that asset limit, that protects your public benefits eligibility, and also gives you like quite a bit of freedom for how you can use the money that you save. So for special needs trusts, attorneys can draft standalone trusts, you know, specific for your family, created by you. There are also 2 pooled trusts in Wisconsin, WisPact and Life Navigators. And they're really great because a lot of times people don't have a huge amount of money to leave to their children. And it might not be enough where a private bank or trustee is going to be interested in managing that trust, because doesn't have tons of zeros after it, but it's more than $2,000. So how do we protect this? Well, these 2 pooled trust programs allow, I think the funding limit is $750 or $1,000. So it's, you know, they don't require a large amount of money to be put in, and they protect the person's eligibility for Social Security and Medicaid. I do have the ABLE National Resource Center here. So the ABLE accounts, it's just like setting up a bank account. You can do it online. I saw somebody do it online at a presentation in like 90 seconds. I think it took them to set up the account. Wisconsin is one of not that many states that does not have their own ABLE program. I think we're down to like one of 9 states that don't have our own. But that doesn't matter. That doesn't stop you from having one. You can choose, I think, pretty much any state's plan. They don't require you to be a resident. In most of the states, this ABLE National Resource Center has a 3-state comparison tool. And you can look at things like, what kind of investments is it in? Does it offer a debit card? Things like that. So it's a really great tool. I think having a debit card is a really important feature, and not all of them have that. So just for whatever that's worth. But these allow you, and we could do a whole presentation on ABLE accounts, but somebody can have up to 100 grand in them and still be eligible for their Social Security benefits. Nobody has 100 grand yet because you can only put in, right now it's $15,000 a year. So they haven't been around long enough for people to build up to that level. But theoretically, you can have that and still get Social Security. And then based on what state you're in, you can have over $400,000 in it and still qualify for Medicaid. I forget what the exact number is. It's like 432 something and some change. Also, for people who are working, you can contribute more than the $15,000 a year if you have earned income. And that number is in the $27,000 range. So mentioned my brother at the outset. My brother he works 20 to 25 hours a week. And he was spending money on pretty stupid stuff to stay under the his asset limit. And so I'm like, hey, create this ABLE account. There's so much you can do with it. So he did that and still buys stupid stuff, but that's okay. We all do. And he's saving some money. So again, like I said, it's not, well, I think everybody who has a disability and works should have one of these. You as of right now, you have to become disabled before age 26, but still that's going to be available, or it is available to quite a lot of people. And I don't think it's either or. I think you should have both, special needs trust and an ABLE account, and there are different reasons why they're both good. But yeah, options that are out there. And that kind of leads us into Social Security, which sometimes is the main income source for people with disabilities, especially when they're very young. So the person, if necessary, who manages somebody else's Social Security income is called a representative payee. And it is their job to use the Social Security money to support and maintain the person, and they have to have comply with Social Security's requirements. The application process you can do in the month the child turns 18. So if the birthday is June 10th, you can June 1st start sending the stuff in, and there's a little bit of a delay in when the person becomes eligible, or not becomes eligible, but receives their first payment. So you have to, they're still considered the parent's responsibility through the month that they turn 18. So as you're getting ready for that and receiving it as a child, you still got to go through the adult process. You know, it's one of those another one of those things where it's like, well, they got it as a child, yep, but you still got to go through this. So about the last year, you don't need to go back to the dawn of time, but especially the last year of medical records showing their treatment, therapy, educational records. That's why I said if you can get that re-eval done in that neck of the woods, that's great. stuff from the waiver, your ISP, whatever it might be, so they can start receiving those benefits as soon as possible. And sometimes, you know, it can be a lag to receive that first check. So with that kind of bleeds into housing. So I think community integration is really, really important. I was just giving a presentation last week and we're talking about the concept of the least restrictive environment. And sometimes, you know, if you are stuck in your house all day and don't get out in the community, even though you're living, you know, independently, so to speak, if you're not actually accessing life outside those four walls, then, you know, it's not very integrated at all. So, you know, is the person able to live either on their own or with roommates? If they're going to stay with family, how are they going to access the community and other things that are important to them? You know, looking at low-income housing options. So the annual income for somebody who gets SSI only, even with the state supplement and everything, is like $8,000 below what HUD, which is Housing and Urban Development, considers extremely low income. So it's so low, it's without looking at, it's less than $13,000 a year. I think it's less than $12,000 a year total that you're expected to live off of. But, you know, with some of these subsidized housing programs and roommate and creative Iris budget or, you know, family care program, you might be able to create a situation where you're not living in a group home and you're living on your own or with somebody you choose to live with and want to live with and accessing your community. But going back to Social Security and managing finances and all that, if your child's going to stay with you, you're not doing them a favor by not charging any rent at all, because Social Security is going to knock them for that and say, because the point of Social Security is room and board, is to make sure your basic needs for food and shelter and, you know, basic utilities are met. So if you're living somewhere rent free, then you don't need the full Social Security benefit. So says the government. Okay. So charging a reasonable amount of rent or room and board, you can do whatever you want with it. You can put it in a savings account for your kid and use it for their benefit. It's not that you need it. It's not that you have to charge them rent or you can't afford it. It's, you know, it costs money for them to live in your house, and that, you know, Social Security is helping to pay for that. Dane County ADRC has a really good resource on this. I can send it to be included after this. Healthcare. So does your child need assistance making, giving informed consent? I said making healthcare decisions, but do they understand what their, you know, what treatment options are? How do you evaluate the options? You know, do they understand the consequences of the decisions? Do they understand like the consequences of disclosing medical records, things like that? I mentioned the supported decision-making agreement here because that's a good way to, when somebody needs assistance but does not need an alternate decision maker, to help include another adult in that process. Anybody can also sign release authorizations, allowing somebody else to speak with a medical or a treatment professional. Anybody can invite somebody to come along with them to an appointment and sit there and listen and ask questions and, you know, help them communicate concerns. Taking advantage of whatever training and education opportunities are available to either learn about their condition, learn about their medications, and going back to the PTP and self-advocacy, what meds do you take and what are they for? That is when you're in the guardianship universe and trying to answer the question, does this person need a guardian? Are they incapable of taking care of themselves? That's one of the first, well, he doesn't even know what meds he's on. Well, why not? Did anybody tell him? Did he ask? Did anybody take the time to explain it or try to teach them in a way that they can understand? Just some of these identifying the gaps, and is there a way to fill them? And maybe the answer is no, and maybe they don't know and they can't know, and that's fine. I'm not saying that's a problem, but if it's just a lack of opportunity, find the opportunity. Transitioning from the pediatric system, healthcare system, to the adult system can be a nightmare for people, especially if you have different specialists. I know, so my brother has spina bifida, and the carryover into the adult world is just not great. Even, being in our neck of the, we're in a suburb of Milwaukee, so, he went to Children's, and he is pushing 30, and he had to see one of his pediatric specialists recently because they're just, I know, Tim shaking his head, and he's not alone. I mean, that's not like the most uncommon thing in the world. So, how do we identify and connect and build bridge between those two systems? And I don't have, obviously, really good answers for that, but the earlier you can start doing it, so you're not in these like crisis situations where you're like, oh my God, I need a neurologist, or I need this specialist, and they're just not there. Thinking about those things early. And just, I'll talk a little bit more about decision-making agreements, but making sure that the person understands, all the elements of making an informed decision. And I have a slide about that, so I guess let's get to that. Making decision. Here we go. So what is an informed decision? It has many parts. So first you need to understand all the information available to you to help make that decision. Understand the outcomes or the consequences of the decision that's made. Have a method of expressing your decision. It does not have to be traditional, like I speak out loud my decision to you, and it can be however works for the person, but it does not have to be a perfect decision the first time or every time or the fifth time. And everybody makes mistakes, and unfortunately people with disabilities seem to be afforded fewer opportunities to try things on their own and make mistakes, and that just, it's less learning opportunities, it's less independence, less autonomy. So just because somebody doesn't make the decision that you would have made, or doesn't get to it, immediately, doesn't mean they don't have the capacity to make informed decisions. So I kind of have a spectrum here of decision making, from supported decision making all the way up to guardianship. There's informal supported decision making. We all do that every day for everything. I mean, people don't choose what restaurant to go to or what new show to watch on Netflix without asking their friends for support in making a decision. That's supported decision making. But we now, as of, I forget if it's 18 or 19, have formal supported decision making agreements. Wisconsin is one of the leaders in the nation in these, having this as an option. There are some really good resources from the ARC, from the Board for People with Developmental Disabilities. I have some of those links in there. You do not have to have any type of mental, cognitive, intellectual impairment to have a supported decision-making agreement. I had a client who used one because he had throat cancer, I believe, or mouth cancer, and he chose to communicate by speaking, but his speech is very difficult to understand for people who didn't know him very well. So he was mainly using this as a way to designate a person to help him communicate his decisions. And it was a friend, it wasn't a spouse or a relative, it was just a friend. And, you know, he felt that that was the best way to make sure that she was where she needed to be to help him make decisions. Next are powers of attorney. I'm putting them in the middle. Everybody should have a power of attorney for healthcare and finance. Everybody, if you're over 18, you should have one. In terms of using it as a way to make decisions for your child, like right now, healthcare power of attorney has to be activated by 2 physicians or 2 medical professionals, which means that 2 professionals say this person is not capable of making their own decisions. So you can't draft a healthcare power of attorney on Monday, get it activated on Tuesday, and use it to make decisions for somebody on Wednesday and say they knew what they, well, not that it's not possible, but generally speaking, and say they knew what they were doing, creating the power of attorney 2 days ago. It's the idea is you are able to make a conscious decision right now about who you would want to make decisions for you in the event you're not able to do it yourself, and direct that person of what you would want for your own health care. The financial power of attorney is a little bit different. You can have that be effective immediately and let the person stand in your shoes to make financial decisions. Or you can have it take effect at some point in the future, including if you're found to have incapacity. And then finally, guardianship, the most extreme, you know, taking away of decision-making powers from one person and giving them to another person. It's divided into person and estate. Person is healthcare, personal, social service, education, employment, those type of decisions. Estate is financial. But it also affects a lot of other rights like voting, marriage, driver's license, serving on a jury, doing your own will, all those things. So guardianship is, I think you're going to hear more about decision-making options next week. I believe guardianship is not going away. I think that it's still necessary in many cases, and that some people really do need it. But I think it's overused, and I think it's used too heavy-handedly. Like it can be, you can have limited guardianships where people retain as much decision-making power as possible, and that isn't used enough, and I just think it's overused. And I think the tendency is to say, well, if you want to get by in the world, you need a guardianship, and how do we fit your kid into guardianship? And there really are a lot of other options, and I also think that starting early with transition planning can give the person access to the education and training and support that can help them totally avoid the need for guardianship in some situations. So powers of attorney, already talked about a little bit. Healthcare power of attorney, you have to be 18 to do it. You can't get that done before you're 18. Same with a supported decision-making agreement. Same with a financial power of attorney. We already talked a little bit about, you know, how you do those. I think this is important though. For a financial power of attorney, you have to be able to select an agent, understand what your financial picture is. What are your income and assets? Where do you keep them? Where do you bank? And understand what powers you would be transferring by creating it. So again, this isn't something that you like draw up and hand somebody and have them sign it and expect it to be like a fair thing to do. And we already talked about guardianship. Now, I will say there is a form for guardianship It's called the examining physician or psychologist's report. And it goes through all these questions about the person's ability to make decisions. And I think it's a good form to use as a starting point, not, you know, you can get it filled out and it doesn't mean you think your kid needs a guardian or that you're going that route, but it answers all these questions about their ability to make decisions, whether less restrictive ways would be appropriate and what those might be, you know, what kind of services that the doctor or the psychologist thinks would be appropriate to help this person not need a guardianship. So that's a state form, and I think even just looking at it and like what a person would be looking for is really helpful as you're thinking about decision-making options and what might be appropriate for your loved one. I did want to mention quickly voting. I mentioned it related to guardianship, but just in general, voting is something that like people with disabilities are the largest minority voting bloc in the country. And I think it's really misunderstood, like what kind of supports and access that if you need it in order to vote that you can have and use. So going back to the PTP and, you know, doing what you can when they're still in high school, understanding the process, understanding how do you register to vote, how do I physically get to a polling location, how do I cast my vote, what does it mean? You know, people a lot of times say my kid can't do it. Well, could they though? You know, what do they need in order to be able to do that? And I was telling Tim before we started, there was a research project that showed that over 90% of elderly folks with Alzheimer's, dementia, still had the capacity to vote even after their disease had progressed. So the idea that somebody's disability limits them, that they cannot vote, is very, very rare, and we should treat it that way, that more than likely you can vote. Okay, a couple of resources here. Guardianship Support Center also has information about other decision-making issues. ARCA Wisconsin on supported decision-making, advanced directives. So you can go online and print off healthcare power of attorney and financial power of attorney. If you don't have one, get one. Don't need a lawyer. It's good to talk to a lawyer about it, but you don't need to. You can do it without one. DPI's transition site, they have the opening doors books. They're kind of old, but I think as a benchmark for all the different areas you have to cover, they're still good. The Rights Law, which is a great special ed resource, has a summary of performance that link is to a template. It's like an 8-page document with nothing filled in it. So I think that gives you an idea of how detailed this document should be as to take with your kiddo to life after high school. Here's my contact information. I like talking to people about stuff because I think it's important that people get educated, and you don't know what you don't know. So feel free to shoot me an email. I like I said, I'm happy to write back if you think of a question you didn't ask on here. And any questions?
That is a lot of information, Vicki. Thank you so very much. I mean, that just, it's a lot of such important stuff that families need to think about before 18 hits, you know, because there's so many things you could have in place that will make life easier down the road.
Yeah.
So thank you. So please put your questions in the chat box. I know there's a lot of information, but feel free to unmute. I'm going to unpin Vicki so that we can all see each other again. Any questions, comments, initial reactions, clarifications?
I have a question. With the ABLE account, do you know, like they're putting that money aside, can they pull from it whenever, or is there a set time that they can pull from it, or for certain things?
Sure. So it has to be used for qualified disability expenses. That's construed pretty broadly. So, things that can help the person in some way. It should be used for them or something that's directly going to benefit them. So like not for a gift for somebody else, or, it could pay for a service, but like not to pay to take a friend along with you to do something in the community, for example. Also shouldn't be used for things that, I always say it shouldn't be used to like go out to the bar on your 21st birthday, like something that could be harmful, cigarettes, alcohol, gambling, things like that. But things that are like enriching your life, it could be things that aren't covered by Medicaid, like therapies or whatnot. It could be, or like dental work that's not covered sometimes. It could be to modify your house. It could be whatever. I think the idea is use ABLE for as many things as it's permissible for, which it can be used to pay your room and board, and it doesn't count as a knock against you for Social Security, which is a really great feature of it. Use it for as many things as you can that are necessary or like directly beneficial, and then that frees up your Social Security money to use for your fun stuff.
Thank you.
Your question.
Sorry, I have one more quick follow-up question with that. I know it's weird to think about for 18-year-olds, but a big thing if someone's over assets and they are ending up buying stupid stuff like you shared your brother buys, you can only buy so many beds in 5 years.
Yeah.
We encourage them to do like a burial trust. Would that be like, could that be pulling out of the ABLE account? Is that separate? Like, would you recommend that as well?
Yeah, the burial trust is a great exempt asset. As far as I know, everyone still dies at some point, so it's not a waste of, it's not a waste of money. It's something, and I also think it's like a gift to your family because you can make those decisions and have your wishes be known ahead of time. So yeah, that's a great option. In terms of paying for it from ABLE, I don't know for sure. I think you can, but I guess I would say is you can usually create those with whatever amount of money and add to them as time goes on. So if that's an option, you could just put it directly into the burial trust rather than ABLE first and then back out. But that's a good question. I think the answer is yes, you could, but I'm not positive on that.
There's a couple of questions in the chat, if you can take a look at them, Vicki.
Are they all after your links? Okay.
Yes, after my extended
Okay.
link.
Is there a checklist of where to start the process? I don't know of a place where everything is all in one place,
Right.
but those opening doors books are broken into 4 different categories. I mean, just off the top of my head, I know there are other resources as well, but I think that's a good place to start. And then who should be brought into the planning? I think siblings for sure, and I'm saying that as a sibling because they're part of, they're probably, well, sometimes the next best thing to mom and dad in terms of like knowing and understanding what the person's needs are. Accountant, yeah, absolutely. Especially if you have an accountant who knows anything about special needs planning. And there are like financial planners who actually specialize in that. There's a separate certificate that you can do. They're not, I don't think it's real common, but it's out there. Because so sometimes I co-present with a financial planner who has that certification. And she always says, you're not just planning your own finances for the rest of your life, you're always also planning it for the rest of your child's life in many situations. So having somebody who has the expertise to do that is really important, and who also gets the public benefits interplay. It's hard. Banker, you know, what I would say about that is sometimes banks reject like powers of attorney, and they're like, I'm not going to honor this. This isn't valid. So I guess to the extent that, you know, you can talk to somebody about that ahead of time. The healthcare, like the network, having, you know, making sure you connect with the adult world on that. And then the disability benefit specialist at the county level, like absolutely reach out to that person. That's their job, is to help tell you, you know, what, not just what's out there, but even to like advise you about, hey, this is a good call in your case.
And then I also put a link in the chat. I have not found, well, nor what I think I want to carry around, a comprehensive checklist for all the different areas, even that we've talked about tonight. But the beforeage18.org website by ERI is one of the better ones out there, one of the more comprehensive ones out there. So that's one of the ones that I would check out.
ERI is good. It's good people. Sorry, somebody was about to say something. Yes?
No, it's quite all right. It's quite all right. Thank you for all this information. We are just going to start this process with our child this summer. And I was the one that asked about who to bring in and so forth. But I asked this, as Tim knows, kind of dual-handedly, because I'm also about building resources here where we live in rural Southwest Wisconsin.
Okay.
And just today I talked to a banker friend of mine and said, hey, I got to get you up to date on what an ABLE account is. And she looked at me blank and she goes, this is one of those things you're going to try and teach me to help other people, right? So I was side talking with Tim, and, you know, sometime I sure would love to put you in front of a crowd of like-minded accountants, business people, health people, and have you help me build resources out here too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can certainly, you know, bring in my financial planner buddy too. And, you know, yeah, I would love to do that. People don't know about ABLE and people don't know about supported decision making still. I mean, both of those things, it's still very much in the get the word out phase.
Yeah, well, just to go on that, we have families that don't even know what DR is. So you having this knowledge and us having generations of farms and businesses and so forth, I could really see you being an incredible asset to us out here.
Well, thank you. I was telling Tim before, my best friend is from Shullsburg, so you can go out, stay at his mom's house, get some good food from the farm, and talk to you guys about ABLE accounts and stuff. Sounds good. Sign me up.
That's great. We'll be in contact.
Any other questions, comments, insights, anything for the good of the company? All right, I'm not seeing anything pop up. So Vicki, thank you so very much for spending time with us tonight. Really appreciate it. Like I said, this is just a bunch of really great information. So thank you for being willing to do this. And I think this might be one of those recordings that even I go back to and listen to again, because there's some good stuff. So I look forward to getting the PowerPoint so that I can get the resources out to the people that registered and help them on their way. So thanks again for being here tonight.
All right. Thank you, guys. Have a good night.
Have a good night, everyone.